She enters not with footsteps, but with fragrance, a suggestion rather than a sound. The illusion is complete before she has even spoken. There is no need for argument, no logic to confront. She is the argument. She is the logic, or so the world has long been trained to believe. In the silence between glances and gestures, a story has been written, not by her, not by you, but by a chorus of centuries. A slow, almost imperceptible mythology, etched in softness, wrapped in velvet, embroidered with virtue. The innocent woman, the gentle muse, the eternal other, untouched, untouchable, clean. But the truth, as Nietzsche knew, is neither soft nor clean. It scratches, tears, disfigures. It does not come to us as a song, but as a scream muffled in silk. A lie becomes most powerful not when it shouts, but when it is whispered through the lips of everyone you've ever loved. Look closer. The myth of female innocence is not born from reverence. It is born from fear. The fear of complexity. The terror of chaos in a face too delicate to hold such storms. So we idealize not to elevate, but to control, to disarm, to cage. Nietzsche did not look away. He stared through the veil and saw not angels, but actors. Not evil, no, something deeper, something too elusive for moral labels. He saw in woman not the purity preached from altars, but the primordial, the cunning, the instinctual, the blood-deep intelligence of survival. And so he wrote not in praise, nor in condemnation, but in revelation. This makes people uncomfortable, as it should. We are a world that prefers our illusions aesthetic. We drape our lies in lace and call them culture. We crown weakness when it wears a pretty face. We speak of female fragility not because it is true, but because it is useful. Because it protects the larger lie that strength is masculine and femininity is to be protected, not questioned. But what if the woman does not want protection? What if she is not soft, not innocent, not here to heal? What if she sees everything and smiles anyway? There is a cruelty in womanhood the world does not permit. It exists in eyes that know too much, in silences that cut deeper than screams, in a kind of power that is never spoken aloud because it does not need to be. The most dangerous thing about a woman is not her beauty. It is her ability to mirror your weakness without ever naming it, to reflect your hunger, your need to be needed, and then vanish, leaving only your own dependence echoing in the room. This is not evil. This is the abyss Nietzsche spoke of. Not the male abyss of conquest and war, but the feminine abyss, internal, psychic, invisible. You do not see it until you are already drowning. And still, the world calls this innocence. A girl plays helpless and the nation leans in. A tear is shed and power congeals around it like iron drawn to a magnet. The infantile voice, the wide eyes, the performance of softness, not always conscious, not always cruel, but always effective. Do you think this is by accident? Do you think millennia of dependence would not teach a person to survive through beauty, through victimhood, through the precise manipulation of attention? Men build empires with swords and law. Women, denied those tools, carve their power into the subtle architecture of the soul. And when the doors to that power are finally opened, the world pretends it sees nothing. Nietzsche asked us to strip the sacred of its veil. And in woman, he saw something too dangerous to be left enshrined. Not because she is evil, but because she is real. And reality does not flatter. We worship women not to honor them, but to avoid meeting them. We call them divine to avoid their humanity. We whisper that they are better than us, kinder, more loving, more empathetic, because to admit otherwise would require a confrontation we are not prepared to have. And so the myth remains. But every myth creates a monster. If she fails to live up to our vision, we call her cold. If she seeks power, we say she has lost her way. If she speaks without pleasing, we say she is broken. If she plays the game too well, we call her manipulative. Too little emotion, she is heartless. Too much, she is hysterical. In every direction, the same trap. No woman is allowed to simply be. Not innocent, not guilty, not saint, not villain. Just human, flawed, hungry, sovereign. Nietzsche's truth is not that women are crueler than men. It is that their cruelty is unspoken, and unspoken things grow in the dark. You want innocence? Look in a mirror. And ask yourself why it frightens you to believe that she sees more than you do, and always has. The greatest lie is not the one we tell others. It is the one we build from silence and dare to call love. Somewhere in the dim corridors of memory, your mother, your first love, your favorite teacher, someone smiled at you with eyes that did not match the softness of their voice. A pause too long, a compliment with thorns. You felt it, but you could not name it. And so you learned to doubt your own perception, to see manipulation as warmth and submission as sincerity. Nietzsche knew that virtue, when worn like a mask, conceals more than just intentions. It hides entire histories of repressed rage, inherited cunning, centuries of disempowerment woven into charm. He did not write to accuse, but to reveal, not because women are false, but because the roles assigned to them are. The ideal woman is not a person. She is a sculpture, hollow, polished, displayed in the gallery of the male unconscious. She exists not to act, but to reflect, not to desire, but to be desired. She is not born. She is made, and the making of her is an act of violence. A girl learns early how to survive in a world that sees her as symbol before soul. She is told to be sweet, to smile, to never be too loud, too opinionated, too much. Every piece of herself that does not fit the mold is gently, then violently, sanded down, until what remains is not a person, but a mirror shining, silent, and empty. But mirrors do not forget what they reflect, and some learn to turn the gaze back. Nietzsche saw in woman a force long denied expression, not a moral weakness, but an untapped reservoir of instinct, will, subtle domination. Not through brute strength, but through what he called the eternal feminine, a power not of action, but of influence. Not direct, but diagonal. A current moving beneath the surface, shaping thought without ever speaking. This is not praise. This is danger. Because when power is denied form, it takes shape in shadows. And woman, denied the sword, became the whisper. She learned that suggestion cuts deeper than demand. That a look can enslave more thoroughly than law. That the right word, at the right moment, can topple empires of certainty inside a man's soul. And men, sensing this, half in awe, half in fear, invented 1,000 stories to cage it. The virgin, the whore, the muse, the wife, each one a leash, each one a hymn to his comfort, not her truth. Nietzsche's gaze is merciless because it is clean. He refuses the lie of sentimentality. He calls the sacred bluff. He sees through the pedestal and asks, what is it hiding? And the answer is nothing comforting. For what if innocence is not real? What if empathy is not natural? What if the ideal woman, kind, selfless, nurturing, is not an archetype, but a fabrication stitched together by men who could not face her full intensity? Then what remains? A woman who chooses, a woman who leaves, a woman who does not explain herself. And for many, this is unbearable, because the moment she steps off the pedestal, she becomes unpredictable. She becomes sovereign. She becomes, finally, human. And humans do not always forgive. They do not always love. They do not always say yes. They look at you and see you, and suddenly you are naked, not in body, but in soul. This is the truth Nietzsche dared to speak, that men do not fear women because they are weak, but because they are not. Because under the lace and the lilt is a wildness that no structure can hold, a strength that does not roar, but endures, a gaze that cannot be bought, only met, and that to meet it, you must be whole. You must be awake, not in fantasy, not in conquest, but in presence. Most are not, and so we retreat into myths. We write poems instead of apologies. We draw halos over shadows and call it reverence. We say she is too good, too beautiful, too mysterious, anything but real. Because if she is real, then so are we. With all our fears, our need to dominate, our quiet desperation for someone to save us from ourselves. This is the burden placed on the feminine, not just to please, but to redeem, to carry the weight of male projection, to be the dream, the healer, the shore. But dreams become prisons, and those who live inside them forget the sky. Nietzsche saw this, and he warned not just men, but women, that to be worshipped is to be erased, that to be idealized is to be confined. that until a woman steps off the stage and breaks the spell, she will never be seen, only believed in. And belief, no matter how beautiful, is not love, not if it demands that you disappear. The mask of virtue is soft, but suffocating, and the longer it is worn, the harder it becomes to breathe. But somewhere, beneath the performance, she waits. Not the muse, not the myth, but the woman, untamed, unreconciled, undisguised. The pedestal always becomes a prison, not for her alone, but for everyone who kneels before it. What begins as worship curdles into expectation. What was once admiration becomes entitlement. The woman we call sacred is no longer allowed to change. She must remain eternal, even as her spirit decays inside the marble shell we carved for her. And so, the beautiful cage closes, gilded with compliments, padded with praise, fragrant with the flowers of half-meant apologies and aesthetic devotion. A cell so delicate that even she forgets it is bars. But the bars are there. You can hear them in the breath she holds before speaking her mind, in the smile she gives instead of the silence she longs for, in the way she says yes when no burns beneath her tongue. We have taught her to keep the world soft, and in return, she becomes hard where it matters most, inside. Nietzsche understood the horror of this arrangement. He saw that the roles we force upon women are not merely wrong, they are grotesque illusions, elaborate rituals of obedience masked as intimacy, performances demanded not from the soul, but from the body, gestures of sweetness scripted for the benefit of an audience too afraid to confront its own savagery. And in return, a smile, a dinner, a lifetime of sacrifice staged as choice. This is the contract we never admit to. We ask for her to be nurturing, then withhold nurture from her. We demand she be beautiful, then punish her for being seen. We say we want equality, but only if she remains charming, only if she continues to soothe. But soothing is not truth, and there is nothing sacred in being reduced to a bomb. When a woman dares to step outside this cage, when she dares to stop being soft, to speak not in comfort but in confrontation, the world recoils. Not because she has done something wrong, but because she has reminded us what we are, dependent on her kindness, on her restraint, on her willingness to bleed quietly. Without that, we do not know how to love. We only know how to consume. So we label her difficult, angry, bitter. We say she has changed. We ask, where did the nice girl go? But there never was a nice girl. Only a woman, starving behind the smile. Nietzsche's greatest discomfort wasn't with women themselves. It was with the image of womanhood society had manufactured. A distortion, a fantasy, a creature designed not to live, but to serve, to reflect our desires back to us with a kind of obedient magic. He saw how this illusion poisoned everything, not just intimacy, not just gender, but the very possibility of connection. Because if the woman is not free to speak, truly speak, then the man cannot hear. And if he cannot hear, he cannot know. And if he cannot know, he remains alone, even in her arms. And so we fall in love with shadows. We make vows to ghosts. We build families atop unspoken resentments, coated in the sugar of tradition and smiles that never reach the eyes. Children grow up learning the same lie, that women are supposed to say yes, even when they mean no. That kindness is mandatory. That silence is golden. That femininity is a service, not a state of being. And the lie metastasizes into marriages that rot quietly over decades, into mothers who cry in parking lots, then smile at dinner, into daughters who inherit the script before they even know how to read. We have not protected women. We have devoured them, politely, elegantly, in ways that even they mistake for love. Nietzsche, savage in his clarity, refused to look away. He saw that beneath every culture's ideals of womanhood lies a fear not of weakness, but of raw, unmediated power. The power to disrupt, to demand, to stop the cycle, to no longer please. And that is why we pretend innocence is natural. Because if it is not, if it is a performance, then the whole theater collapses. And we are left with ourselves. Clumsy, needy, loud. Men who never learned how to be held without dominating. Women who never learned how to be heard without softening their voice. a species addicted to symmetry, terrified of truth. So we keep the cage beautiful. We paint it with songs, with cinema, with ancient texts and Instagram quotes about divine femininity. We tell her she is powerful as long as her power is quiet, as long as it heals us, as long as it makes us feel less monstrous. But power that must serve is not power. It is slavery, disguised in perfume. And still, she stays. Not because she agrees, but because there are not enough exits. The cage has become architecture, and every home, every church, every stage and classroom is shaped by its dimensions. To leave it is not just to rebel, it is to enter a wilderness where language fails, where she is no longer understood, where love does not come easy. But maybe that's the point. To be free is not to be adored. It is to be known, even in your refusal to bend, even when it costs you everything. The world will not clap for her when she steps outside the script. It will mock her, punish her. It will call her broken, lonely, unlovable. And still she must walk. Because anything less is a kind of slow death, not of the body, but of the soul that once knew how to say, I do not exist for your comfort, and meant it. Let the cage rust. Let the myths collapse. Let her name be spoken not with reverence, but with reality. She is not innocent. She is alive. It doesn't begin with fire. It begins with a pause. A silence so sharp it cuts through the performance, not loudly, but like breath catching in the throat before a truth no longer willing to be ignored. The first crack. It happens when she hears her own voice echo, and suddenly it sounds unfamiliar. Sweet, polished, polite, too polite. Not wrong, just rehearsed. It has pleased everyone but her. And that's when it begins. She doesn't scream. She doesn't throw the mask to the ground or write a manifesto. She just stops smiling. And the world notices. Not all at once, but in those tiny moments where performance used to live. A slow blink where laughter should be. A hesitation before bending to meet someone else's need. A quiet refusal to make others comfortable at the expense of her own breath. They ask what's wrong. She says, nothing. But inside, something ancient stirs. Something that doesn't want to go back inside. Something that never wanted to be small. It is not rage, not yet. It is remembering. Remembering what it felt like before she learned to be liked. Before the world taught her that being chosen was more important than being real. That attention could replace affection. That softness was safety. She begins to notice the way people listen differently when she stops cushioning her words. How quickly warmth turns to withdrawal when she speaks without sugar. She sees their eyes flicker, not because she's unkind, but because she's no longer hiding. And with every flicker, another illusion dies. One by one, the myths loosen their grip. She was never just here to inspire. She was never here to complete anyone. She was never here to save, to soothe, to simplify the world with her stillness. That was the story, not the truth. And yet, the story is everywhere. In the eyes of strangers. In the silence of friends. In the shape of her own reflection, tilted slightly to appear more delicate. But now, she sees it. And that seeing, that unbearable clarity, becomes its own kind of prayer. Not to be loved, but to be seen, even in the mess, even in the wild, even when it ruins the script. She starts to say, I don't know more often, and I don't want that. And no. No apology, no softness to pad the edges, just no. It doesn't feel good, at first. It feels like standing naked in a room full of mirrors that have never reflected you properly. It feels like exile. It feels like grief. Because that's what this is. A grieving of the girl she became to survive. The agreeable one. The nice one. The accommodating ghost who floated through the world, always making space for everyone else, never asking if there was any left for her. That girl was good. She was necessary. But she was never free. And freedom does not come with applause. It comes with silence. The silence of not being called back. Of not being understood. Of watching people shrink away from the fullness of your becoming. But there is beauty in that shrinking. Because what remains is real. The people who stay. The spaces that open. The laughter that doesn't taste like performance. The solitude that no longer feels like punishment, but like peace. She begins to walk differently. Not quickly, not defiantly, but with the slow, deliberate steps of someone returning to their own body. She touches the parts of herself she once ignored. The anger, the hunger, the heat, the wild. Not to tame them, but to listen, to feel where they live and what they want to say. And they say this: you were never meant to be safe. You were meant to be whole, to bleed without shame, to want without guilt, to speak without translation. She closes her eyes and sees it. Not a future, not a plan, but a clearing, a space where no one is owed softness, where she is not required to explain, where she can exist without costume or choreography. It is terrifying, and it is hers. For the first time, she does not feel like a character. She feels like a woman, not the kind sculpted by centuries of yearning, not the kind who exists to forgive, but the kind who remembers, the kind who refuses, the kind who stays. And in that staying, in that solemn refusal to shrink 1 second longer, something sacred takes shape, not outside, but inside. A pulse, a breath, a life that no longer waits to be invited. The first crack has become a fracture, and though the world still sings the old lullabies, they no longer lull. She is not asleep, not anymore. There comes a moment, always in silence, when the myth no longer holds. It doesn't explode. It dissolves. Not with fire, but with fog lifting. You look at the life you've built, the smiles you've offered, the rituals of sweetness, and you can no longer find yourself inside them. They were yours, once, or so you believed. But now they lie there, like clothes that no longer fit. Familiar, but foreign. She stands in the kitchen, in the doorway, in the mirror, and something within her no longer answers to the name she has been called. Not goddess, not muse, not sweetheart, not good girl. Only silence responds. And in that silence, something breaks. It's not pain, not exactly. It's recognition. A subtle, irreversible knowing that the person who performed her way through every room, every role, was never truly alive. She was an echo, a soft, compliant shadow who said yes when she wanted to scream, who smiled when she was starving, who carried other people's weight while erasing her own. And she was loved for it. That's the part that hurts. She was rewarded for disappearing, applauded for shrinking, cherished for not needing much, for not taking up space, for making others feel bigger, better, loved at the cost of her own breath. They didn't love her. They loved the space she left behind. She sits with this truth not in rage, but in quiet, a kind of holy exhaustion, a grief without tears, too deep for sound. Like discovering a locked door inside your own chest and realizing the key was always in someone else's hand. And you gave it to them, willingly, for safety, for love, for permission to exist. The myth of the beautiful, agreeable woman, it wasn't just forced on her. She chose it, not because she was weak, but because she was afraid. Because somewhere along the line, someone taught her that to be difficult was to be alone, that to be whole was to be unlovable. But now, the myth is breaking. The script, once so easy to recite, begins to slip from her tongue. The words feel dry, the smile mechanical. She looks at her own gestures, the tilt of her head, the softness in her voice, and wonders who she became while trying to be good. It's like waking up mid-sentence, in the middle of a performance you no longer remember choosing. The audience claps. The lights are hot, and you are tired. So she stops. She doesn't explain. She doesn't rage. She simply lets go of being understood, of being palatable, of being the answer to someone else's question. And that letting go, it is not grand. It is not cinematic. It is not something the world will notice. But inside, it is an earthquake, a collapse of roles, a funeral for a self that only existed in reflections. She deletes the message, unread. She leaves the table early. She walks home in the rain and doesn't pretend to enjoy it. Not because she's sad, but because she's done pretending. The collapse is not cruel. It is sacred, like returning a borrowed name, like laying down a costume you've worn since childhood. She thought freedom would feel like flight, but it feels more like falling, not downward, inward. into a self she left behind long ago, into a voice that doesn't smile on command, into desires that don't ask for permission, into a body that no longer owes softness to anyone. This is not revenge. This is not rebellion. This is release. She lets herself be unlikable, awkward, silent, angry. She lets herself not respond. She lets herself not heal on anyone else's timeline. And in the stillness that follows, the one that used to terrify her, something quiet arrives. Something unadorned. Something real. Herself. Not the version the world curated. Not the role she memorized. But the one who stayed hidden beneath every performance. She has no name yet. But she is breathing. And for the first time, no one else is holding the rhythm. There is a room without mirrors. No reflections. No names. No roles waiting to be worn. Only the sound of breath. The weight of being. The soft, persistent hum of existence untouched by performance. She stands in that room now. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just there. Like rain on stone. Like wind tracing the outline of an open window. She does not need to explain where she's been. There is no audience left to applaud her return. The story she once tried to perfect of who she is, who she should be, lies folded in the corner, like paper worn too thin to hold words. And somehow, this is enough. She touches her face and does not search for beauty. She moves without waiting to be seen. There is no performance left in her gestures, only rhythm and presence and a strange, aching peace. To be human, after all, was never about being loved by all. It was about standing still long enough to be real, to not shrink from the gaze of your own soul, to see the wounds and not reach to hide them, to know you are made of contradiction and breath and the kind of quiet that makes people uncomfortable and still remain. She no longer softens her voice unless she chooses to. She no longer decorates her sentences with apology. And when she says no, there is no tremble in it. It simply stands, firm, gentle, unmoved, not as resistance, but as truth. There are people who will call this arrogance. They will say she's changed, that she's lost her lightness, that she used to be easier to love. And they will be right, because she has stopped earning affection with erasure. She has stopped translating her discomfort into silence. She has stopped being the soothing soundtrack to someone else's chaos. What remains is not easy. What remains is not soft. But what remains is hers. And in that, there is a stillness no storm can touch. She walks slower now, not because she is uncertain, but because she is no longer rushing to prove she belongs. She lingers in doorways. She pauses mid-thought. She leaves things unsaid, not from fear, but from freedom. Not everything must be explained. Not every silence must be filled. There are parts of her no one will ever know. Not because she is hiding, but because not everything is meant to be consumed. She does not fear solitude anymore. In its arms, she found the parts of herself she once offered too freely, the longing to be heard, the ache to be held, the need to be chosen. She chose herself, and it was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was a quiet, consistent returning, again and again, to the self she left behind in small moments, the half-smile, the swallowed truth, the dressed-down desire. Now she stays, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's misunderstood, even when the world does not clap. Especially then, she has become the thing she was taught to avoid, whole, unpredictable, unapologetic. And in that wholeness, she no longer needs to be loved for what she gives. She no longer fears being left when she stops performing. She is not performing. She is being. And there is no script for that. No curtain call. No spotlight. Only this. The sound of her own breath. The feeling of space that is finally hers. And the slow, sacred knowing that the woman she was never allowed to become has always been waiting. Not to be seen, but to see. To see the world not as a stage to impress, but as a ground to stand on. To see herself not as a collection of pleasing traits, but as a soul made of sky and soil and silence. To see the myth not with rage, but with distance. Like a dream she has finally woken from. It floats, now, powerless, distant. A story for another time, another version of herself she no longer needs. The air is different here. It tastes of ash and rain and something unnamed. Something old. Something honest. The kind of truth that does not scream. It simply remains. Like her,